This episode is sponsored by refractivehealing.com. I highly recommend scheduling a remote healing with Jamie, as she is a talented healer and I had a great experience with her. She performed some kind of healing over me online, and I'm telling you, I was in a state of meditation like in 5 seconds. She is currently offering free healing sessions, so just visit the website refractivehealing.com to book a session with her. I will leave a link to the website in the pinned section below.
About 12 years ago, I had a near-death experience. I had gotten injured at work and had to have a spinal surgery. And the spinal surgery kicked in a weird autoimmune condition called mast cell activation disorder. And that triggered me to go into anaphylactic shock and respiratory failure 18 times in 2.5 years. And the first time that I coded, I was with God, and the last time that I coded, I was with God, and then I didn't have any more issues after that. And that's kind of how the whole thing starts. So yeah, I was in the kitchen with my daughter, and I was still home recovering from surgery, and I'd made shakes for us, and we were drinking these shakes, and I just started to feel odd, kind of weird and anxious, and I'm not an anxious person, so that was really unsettling to me. And we were out on the porch, and I kept trying to kind of just push it back out of my mind, just relax, you're fine, you're fine. And then I noticed I was drooling, and I thought, oh goodness, I'm having trouble swallowing. Okay, something's really wrong. My mouth started itching, my chest started itching, and I knew I was having some sort of allergic reaction. And I had EpiPens on hand, these epinephrine injections, because I have a history of shellfish allergy, but I've never had to use these. And we've just always had them on hand just in case I get cross-exposed or something like that. And since I was a teenager even, I've had them. And I went in and I kind of was going back and forth on whether I wanted to do something so drastic as to take those shots that I'd had all those, for so many years and never used. And I decided I was going to have to. It was time. And so I gave myself the first injection, and my youngest son drove me to the hospital. And I never know what happened to him after that. I need to ask him. I think he was just in the waiting room because they wouldn't let him back. But I went to the counter, and there was a nurse there who I knew, who was not the nurse he wanted if something serious was going on. And I set the EpiPens come in 2 packs. And so I set the pack on the counter. She could see one was missing. And I was looking up to breathe because I couldn't, my throat was so tight. And she's like, okay, what do you need? And I said, anaphylaxis. And she's like, did you take the pen? And I said, yes. And she said, well, then why are you here? And I'm, wheezing. And I said, I can't breathe. I need help. And she said, well, I don't have a room right now. I mean, I've got a room, but I don't have a room that's got a bed in it. And I can't put you in a room without a bed. And I'm telling her, I don't need a bed. I need help. And she said, we'll just put you in this wheelchair until we get a bed. So she put me in this wheelchair and put me down this hall where the doctor's sleeping quarters is and where the staff restrooms are. So not a trafficked hallway, and it's a dead end hallway. And I'm down this hall past the nurse's station, and I'm having more and more trouble. I'm getting more and more anxious. I can tell it's picking back up. It's called refractory anaphylaxis. And I start thinking, okay, I'm going to have to take that second EpiPen or I'm going to die. And I couldn't get enough breath to get up out of the chair to try and go get help. I just was in a bad way. And so I gave myself the second shot, and that eased it up for 15, 20 minutes or so. And then it started back again. And it got to the point that I developed stridor. And so stridor is this where the airway narrows so much it makes a whistling sound. It's really loud, and nothing else sounds like it. And so if you're in an emergency room, you hear that sound, there's trouble. And this, I can't remember if it was a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant, but she stuck her head around the corner and panicked immediately and came running toward me. And she's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So she takes me into that room that I was waiting for that was ready. And they start trying to get an IV in me. Well, my blood pressure's dropping because of the anaphylaxis. And they can't get an IV in, and I'm just in a critical way. And they start injecting me with steroids and epinephrine and Benadryl, just intramuscular injections. And I'm not improving. And she finally says, we've got to move you across to the trauma bay. And I had worked in that ICU before, so I would work codes in the ER, and I was familiar with what goes on in the trauma bay as a nurse. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to die. And so they raced me across the ER into this trauma bay, and they finally get a little IV, and it's about half hanging out, very tenuous. And I'm being really careful because I know that's the only access they've got. And so now they're doing steroids and Benadryl and epinephrine in the IV. And I'm having little bits of relief, and then I'll go back into struggling again. And so finally my husband shows up, and he just takes one look at me. I'm sitting straight up in the bed, looking straight up, drooling because I can't swallow. And he looks at the doctor and he's like, "You've got to do something. You're going to lose your airway." And the doctor says, no, we've got plenty of time before that happens. And 5 minutes later, I code. And so I'm in the room. I kind of remember collapsing. And then I remember being outside my body above me looking down, but I didn't know that the person in the bed was me. And so I heard the code call go off, and I thought, oh no, somebody's really in trouble. And I saw the people come running in. One of the respiratory therapists, who I didn't know, had a bald spot on the crown of his head, which I wouldn't have been able to see from the bed. And I saw them all start working on me. And as they were filing in, my husband was getting pushed out, and he was out in the hall, or out in the emergency room, just out of the room I was in. And so finally they get ready to intubate me, and they have this tongue blade that they snap open. It sits on your tongue, goes back into your throat, and holds your airway open so they can feed the tube into the lung. And I hear the tongue blade snap. And when I heard it snap, I was out. And they had given me drugs, of course, to paralyze me. They give you a paralytic so that you don't grab or anything. And then I don't know if they sedated me or not. I know for all of that first part, I wasn't sedated. And so then I'm just like in darkness, like asleep. I have no idea what's going on. And the next time that I have consciousness again, I'm in the back seat of my sister's car. And my sister lives in Wisconsin. I live in Kentucky. So a good distance. And it's nighttime. It's raining. She's driving. And I'm thinking, why is she driving in this pouring rain? And then I realize that I don't feel normal. My density isn't normal. I can't feel the seat on my butt or my legs or my back. And I'm like, okay, something's weird with me. I don't want to scare her, so I'm not going to say anything. And she's driving. She pulls over at a gas station underneath a canopy. And I look over the seat, and she's wearing clothes that are mismatched and wrinkled. And I thought, did she get dressed right out of the laundry basket? Like, what's going on? There must be some emergency for her to be out driving in this weather, dressed the way she is. And she pulls her phone out of her pocketbook, and she types in, "Hang on, kiddo, I'm coming," which was a message to my daughter, a private message to my daughter. And so no way I could have seen or known about that. And then I go back out. And when I come to again, I'm in what I call the void. So this really dark place that isn't hell. People always ask me, was it hell? And I'm like, no, it wasn't hell. If I had to liken it to anything, I'd say maybe the Catholic purgatory. It's kind of a holding area. And I didn't know why I was there, or where I was, or like what was wrong with me that I couldn't move. Why was I in this really dark place? How big was this dark place? Just all the things you would wonder if you found yourself suspended in darkness. And I would try to move, and I felt like some kind of pressure holding me, and I'm really claustrophobic, so that would freak me out, and I would start panicking, and then I'd go back into the deep sleep. And so this went on and on and on, and I was trying to figure out where I was and why I was there. And it was such a long time that I started questioning my version of reality. Maybe I never lived that life. Maybe I never existed at all. Maybe I just made up all of these things so I would have something to think about to not go crazy. And I thought, well, maybe all those things did happen, and maybe I was once alive, but I did something terrible, and I've been cast away. And it was such a terrible thing that nobody's even looking for me. And that was an awful thought. And so I would go in and out of consciousness, kind of having these thoughts. And I tell people time there is very different. It's all at once and a very long time, all at the same time. And things aren't necessarily chronological, but they make sense for some reason. Time's not linear. But if I had to liken it to time here, I would say 10 years. And I also tell people, because I get a lot of people who really freak out, that I think that a near-death experience is different than a death experience where you're not returning to your body. This is something that God knows you're going back from. And so this is an opportunity to teach you something about the nature of God, the nature of heaven, your own nature and who you're designed to be, because you're going back. And of course, God knows that ahead of time. And so don't freak out. I have a lot of people that are really scared to death, and the void thing freaks them out. But listen to the whole story. So at one point, I wake up and I'm in the space, and for some reason, I decide to tilt my body like a plank instead of bending at the waist or just trying to move my arms. And when I tilt forward, I start to move forward. And I was so excited. I thought, oh, hot dog, I figured it out. I know how to move or where to go. But off to my left, kind of like if you were at the end of the street and a house 12 or so houses into the street had a living room light on, you would see this faint glow. And that's what it looked like. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go that way. So I turn my body, and the more I flatten out, the faster I go. And I remember thinking, I hope this isn't a forest because I'm going to hit a tree and that's really going to hurt. And I'm flying exceeding like car fast, and I get to this place, and on the right, I can see what looks like leaded glass, like a wall. And I can't see through it, but I can tell that's where the light is coming from, is the other side of this wall. And I go up to the wall and I put my hands on it, and it's definitely solid. And I get closer and closer, trying to look into whatever's on the other side. And as my nose hits the glass, I can see what's on the other side. And it's me. And I'm in a bed. It's clearly in a hospital. I'm on the ventilator. I'm restrained to the bed. My wrists are restrained. I'm intubated, so I'm on life support. My daughter is standing behind me to my right, and she's a super private person. And I always wondered, like I still to this day wonder, what is she thinking? Because she's just really private and very stoic. And she's got this red flannel shirt on. And immediately I remembered it was August. And I wondered why she would be wearing a flannel shirt in August. And as I looked at the shirt, I could see every fiber. I could see what it was made of. I could see light coming off of it. It had a scent to it. It had a vibration to it. And I experienced her shirt, for lack of a better way to describe that. And when I experienced the shirt, I understood why she was wearing it. It's very soft and comfortable. There's something soothing in the way the fabric is knit together. And she was in a very scary place emotionally. And so this is actually the perfect shirt to be wearing. And if I were awake in the bed, I wouldn't have been able to see her because she was behind me. But I was accurate on what she had worn that day. And I look up at the monitors, and I can see that I'm critical but stable. And I remember I know that because I'm a nurse. And I thought, okay, this is confirmation. I really lived this life. And I look at the drugs and the drip rates, and I realize I'm in an induced coma just because I've given those drugs before, working in ICU. And then I go to reach for my daughter, and I put my arms out, and my arms hit the wall, and I just lose it. And I'm crying and carrying on, basically hysterical, yelling at God, what's wrong with you? Like, why? I'm obviously alive. Why won't you let me go back in? This is cruel to let me see her and not be able to gather her into my arms. And because I was so hysterical, I went back to the void and went to sleep and got pulled back. And when I woke up again, I immediately knew how to move. And so I went back. And this time when I went back, instead of the wall being like this leaded glass, it was more like a bubble. And I could actually see it moving with the air current. And I put my hand on it, and my hand started to go through. And I thought, oh, hot dog, this is it. I know what to do. And so I put my other hand, and it went through. And as both hands went through, I popped all the way through. So I'm back above myself, same scene, just my daughter's not there. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll just wait and I'll get sucked back into my body, and then I'll wake up and everything will be okay. And that's not what happened. And so I thought, okay, maybe I need to wake me up. And I focused on the me in the bed and tried to wake her up, stared at her and tried to will her awake. And that wasn't working. I got really frustrated and reined it in because I didn't want to get sucked back again, because this really felt like progress. And I thought, okay, you're trying too big. Try to get her to move her finger. And so I'm focusing on the finger, and I can see the restraints on her wrist, and it's freaking me out because I'm claustrophobic, and she won't move her finger. And I get really upset. I get pulled back behind the wall again on the other side, but I don't lose it. And so I'm there, and I'm like, okay, just be calm. There's something you're supposed to be figuring out here that you're not figuring out. And I'm like, what is this place? Why am I in this place? What is this supposed to represent? And I think it was the first time I realized that it was a representation of something, that it wasn't actually a physical place. That's a weird thing to say, because spiritually things are more real than they are here. So physically it is a place, but not in the sense you would think of here. And I realized in that moment that I had made the dark void. I had made this place of isolation and separation in my life spiritually. And it was just manifesting itself physically on the other side to show me what was happening to my spirit in my body. And I realized that for every hurt that I had gone through, every, terrible thing, every trauma, I had just stacked these bricks around myself. And it looked like I was a functioning person. I acted like a functioning person, but I didn't have relationships that were close and intimate. I'd been divorced a while, wasn't with anybody, didn't want to be with anybody. And I was just basically living life, going through the motions. I wasn't engaged. I wasn't plugged in. I wasn't what we're sent here to be. I was just existing basically. And as soon as I realized it, that I had made this place, that this was the manifestation of my life choices and my isolating myself, it started to crack. And it looked kind of like an egg as the light came in. It cracked at the top, and the top seemed sort of narrow, like the top of an egg. And light started coming in, and I could hear this kind of haunting cracking, echoing in the distance, like when a frozen lake starts to thaw. And as the light started rushing in, this bright spirit came to me, and big, like probably 10 feet tall, kind of had the form of a body, but not a physical body, more spiritual, clothed in light. And she was coming toward me very quickly, and I just burst into tears and was crying, ugly crying. And she put her arms out, and as she put her arms out in front of her, I was drawn into her arms. She didn't have to touch me. And so she put one arm around me and was holding me, and I was just hysterically crying. And these shards of the darkness that had cracked were coming at her, at this energy that was around her. And every time they would come toward her, they were trying to get to me. And she would put her fist out, and she'd hit that shard, and it would shatter into a million pieces, and that darkness would be forever gone. And she finally is holding me to her, and she says, "Calm yourself, dear one." And she said it in this way that is like when we inject somebody with something to put them to sleep for surgery. You can't resist it. It has its effect no matter what your will is. And when she said it, it was like it broke apart into its tiniest elements and coursed through my body. And I was immediately calm and receptive to communication with her. Before, I was so upset there just wasn't anything that you could talk to me about. And I couldn't figure out who she was. And so I was looking at her, and I looked up at her eyes, and her eyes were very familiar, this kind of beautiful blue-green eyes. And then I looked up further, and on her head was this orange hair, kind of cut short, but it was moving like flames. And I immediately knew it was my grandmother, my mom's mom, Levita Patrius. And she had died when I was young, 9 or 10. But this woman was a force. People loved her. I remember that there were so many people at her funeral, we couldn't fit everybody inside. And I remember the line of cars to get into the cemetery was just so long. And she just was this force in life, and had a real sense of protecting the little guy and fighting injustice. And I have gotten so much of that from her. And so I asked her, I said, "Oh my gosh, I thought you were dead." And she said, "Oh, no, dear one, there's no death. There's just alive in your body or super alive here." And I said, "Oh, okay." And she said, "You know this. You learned this." And I'm no, I didn't. She's just telepathically speaking these things. And I said, "No, I didn't learn this." She said, "You did. You learned this as a little girl. You learned this in primary school." And I'm racking my brain. I'm thinking, what is she talking about? I would remember learning this. And she said, "Energy isn't created or destroyed. It just changes form." And she said, "It is true on earth. It is true here. It's God's law borrowed by man." And I thought, of course, there's an energy to a human that exceeds their physical form. Um, there's a spiritual energy, and energy can't be created or destroyed. It has to go somewhere. Why is this the first time I'm understanding this? And it was like the reassurance that I needed, that there was an afterlife. There was this scientific explanation for it, which was important to me. And so I asked her, I said, "Am I dead?" And she said, "Oh, no, you're not dead. You're different. You're kind of in the middle." And she said, "If you decide, there's a cord that's attaching you to your body. And if you decide to stay, the cord will be cut. And if you decide to go back, then you'll go back. The cord will be left intact until you finally leave." And that was kind of the extent of our conversation, beside her just holding me and loving me. And so at some point I realized she's gone. And I don't know where she's gone, but I'm floating in this light is everywhere. And it was just the most pleasing thing. It was light, like this whitish light, but in it were these little gold flecks. And then there was a whole universe of light that was coming out of these little gold flecks. And all of a sudden I hear this kind of thunderous roaring, and I know it's God. And I immediately panic. And I'm trying to think of something good that I've done in my life, because I know that my grandmother could read my thoughts. How much more could God? And I want to have something at the ready when he gets to me, so he'll be able to read my thought and it'll be a good thing. And I couldn't. It was just awe. I just could not think of anything. And so he's getting closer and closer, and I can feel this rattling, this thundering of everything that had ever existed, everything that would ever exist. Everything was roaring and shaking in relation to the power of God. And so he got closer and closer to me. And as he got to me, all he said was, "I am." And I had heard it a million times, but I understood what it meant. I am the author of all of this. I am the creator of the universe, the thing that set everything in motion. Here I am, and I am with you, and I love you. And just to have the creator of the universe, like that's his initial thing. And what was really interesting was that he was enamored with me. And I had always imagined, we'd go to heaven and, we'd sing hymns for the millionth time and be like, there's got to be something more to do here. I can't sing hymns for all eternity. But it's not about that. It was that he took such joy in my presence. It is true that God sings and dances over us. He was so thrilled to see me, more thrilled than I was to see him. Like I couldn't have mustered that kind of joy. And he just was thrilled to see me, and I was overcome by it. And so, I could feel him loving me, and I'm in his light, and I knew we were going to go through some of my life experiences, and I couldn't think of any. And so he pops up one, and it's kind of like it's not a screen, but the scene is playing out in front of you, separate from you. And he showed me this scene where I had been in a grocery store, and there was a lady in the store in front of me, and she was just short change and being able to pay for her purchases. And so she was trying to figure out what to put back, and she'd grabbed like moisturizer, and I knew that was for her. And as a single mom, it just killed me. And I said, no, don't put anything back. Let me help you. I've got the change. And she was humiliated. She's like, no, it's fine. I don't need that anyway. And I said, please let me do this. I've been there. And so I gave her the change, and, she was, bless her heart, blushing, just so humiliated. And she took her things and she left. And I had completely forgotten about that. And I'm like, of all the good things I've done, it was comical to me this is the one you pick. I mean, I've saved lives. I did CPR one time on a person for 47 minutes. If you've never done CPR, doing it for 47 minutes is almost physically impossible. But we were trying so hard to get this woman back because she was young. And it just was crazy that he picked this little thing that in my mind had been quite insignificant. And so he said, let me show you something. And it was like he put out his hand and these ripples of this pond extended. And I could see her in the future working in this food pantry. And this woman came in much like her and was humiliated and said, I need help. I don't have enough food for my kids. And the lady said, I've been where you are. Come over here. Let me help you. And started filling a box for her. And he said, every small thing that you do ripples out. And that kindness carries forward. There is no small act. And I just was amazed by this. I thought, here my whole life, I'm trying to do the big things. And I didn't realize that the little things I had ignored along the way would have rippled forward just as far. And I missed those opportunities. There's more opportunities on a day-to-day basis to do something small than there is to do something big. And we talk ourselves out of doing those small things for weird reasons all the time. I don't know why. And so then he was going to show me something negative, and I was kind of girding myself for that. And he showed me this scene where it was a woman that I worked with as a nurse, and I didn't like working with her because she wasn't very attentive to her patients. And, their IV alarms would go off for an hour, and it would drive me crazy. And so I'd have to go in there and take care of it because I know it would drive me crazy. If it's driving me crazy, it's driving the patient crazy in the room. And I just didn't like working with her. I didn't feel like she had a good work ethic. And God showed me her life, and he showed me the things that her father had done to her from the time she was a very little girl, and how that had led to drug abuse and further sexual assaults and just all these different things. And it struck me that despite being used and abused the way that she was, that she chose to go into a helping profession. She wanted to make the world a better place. And, by my estimation, she wasn't doing a good job at it, but who am I to be doing the estimating? She was doing an incredible job considering what she'd been through. And, and God wasn't showing me that to chastise me. And he said, I know you never spoke ill of her because I don't gossip as a rule. And he said, but you had these negative thoughts about her, and thoughts lead to words and words lead to deeds, but it all starts with a thought. And people can sense your thoughts. And by you having these constant negative thoughts about her, it makes it harder for her to break out of that thing that she doesn't want to be anymore. You're piling on. And he said, he can sense it. And it's true. If you walk into a room where two people were arguing, even though the arguing stops when you walk in, you still feel it. And I had birthed that tension between us and kept it going rather than just coming alongside her and trying to mentor her or doing other things that would have been more positive and could have helped with personal growth. I just put up a wall against her. And it meant so much to me that he showed me that. I think people worry you're going to have a life review and you're going to see good things, but you're going to see bad things and God's going to judge you. And it wasn't like that. He was teaching me how to be better. He said, I'm going to teach you how to be more like me. I don't judge her for her lack. I look at her whole life. I look at her heart, and she's doing better, than she had. And that is something. And so it really has changed my view of people, and, even people who are jerks who do terrible things. There's a certain amount of grooming that goes into that. And if we're not the light to them, if we don't show those people love and compassion, where will they ever see it? Because they're probably surrounded with people that are a lot like them, because we just by nature tend to do that. And so he showed me all of that. And then I knew that there was going to be some further experience, but that I had to surrender to him to have it. And I immediately bristled up. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. It was just so my nature, or was. And I said, you know what? No, you say you love us. You say you care about us and that we're your children, but I call BS on that because my husband left us and that was fine. It was a terrible thing, but I'm an adult and I can take that. But he abandoned his own children. And I watched those kids walk out to the mailbox and wait for something to be delivered that was never going to come. And How could you do that to them? And he said, oh, dear one, you've completely misunderstood me. And so he shows me this scene, which actually took place years later. He showed me this scene where I'm on the soccer field in the bleachers with my son, watching my oldest grandchild play soccer. And in the scene, he's 5. At the time, he was actually 2. And he's running up and down the soccer field and just so alive and beautiful and everything children are. And my son looks at me and he says, Mom, I'm going to be the dad to him that I deserved. And in that moment, I realized that God was breaking this chain of emotionally and physically absent fathers in our family, and that we were the chosen generation to do that. And to realize that you're the chosen generation to break an ancient curse on your family is quite something. Why us, I don't know, but it was our generation. And I thought, okay, if that was the reason, then we could take one for the team to save grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on from this fatherless curse. And so then I decide to let God in is like to go to a football stadium and have to peel off every piece of your clothing. It is so intimate and almost humiliating. I felt almost humiliated because I knew there was so much in me that wasn't good. Not like God. I mean, I'm basically a decent person, but that's nothing when standing next to God. And so I was embarrassed about it. And I always tease, I tell people, I met my husband when I was 40. And, we went on many dates before we were ever intimate with each other. And I knew at some point I was going to have to disrobe in front of him and the lie would be told, I would be outed. He's like, wait a minute. You don't look like that in clothes at all. And I'm like, it's the hardware. They sell hardware for this stuff. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was, for the first time in my life, going to have to be honest about who I was in front of God. That's hard enough to do that in front of a person, but to do it in front of God is entirely different. And I thought about it for a while, and finally I said, okay, let's do it, And as soon as I agreed to it, his light came off of him almost like a fingertip and started going around my feet, came in through my feet, up through my calves, up into my middle, and I could feel it going around all these visceral hurts that had happened over a lifetime and soothing them and healing them like a balm. And it went up into my heart, and my heart that had been so hard and so closed off started to soften. And it was a scary feeling to be turned on, have my emotions turned on again and not be this closed off person. And I felt very vulnerable. And then it came up through my throat. It hit my tongue and lit up my tongue. And I was singing beautiful songs, and I can't sing a lick. And then it came back through, came up to where it was going to come out of my eyes. I could feel it in the back of my head, behind my eyes. And I closed my eyes because I didn't want to let it out. And it shot through my eyelids and my eyelashes, and it hit the light of God that was surrounding me. And it came rushing back in, started going through all these little curves in my brain, waking up my brain. And I knew all things. And I knew I would not be able to remember it. And I was so trying, like when you're trying to remember a dream, you're trying to grab onto that. And the harder you try to remember it, the further away the dream slips. That's what it felt like. But I had these assurances that God is still God. God is on his throne. God is still in control. We live in a world that is fallen, and evil has control of the world for a time. But that time is quickly coming to an end. And the God overall is going to be back in control. And it just became very clear to me that all of these things in the world that were going on that seemed so wrong were not to be laid at the feet of God. They were to be laid at the feet of the King of the world, who is not God, but evil. And we fight against powers and principalities and forces in high places that are warring and kind of manipulating things. And we have to be light to that. We're the only opportunity for light to that, because Jesus doesn't walk among us anymore. We have to be that. And so I knew that we were going to go further, and he took my hand, and I never saw a face. But his energy was very masculine. The way I heard his voice was masculine. But there was that part of me that was in him too, where I'm fashioned in his image, and the nurturing that is in me and the mothering that is in me was also in him. And, but it was just still clear that that is because he is the author of all of that. And so we started going through my DNA, and we're going through all these little curves and spirals, and I can feel the DNA, the strands stroking over my skin. And it was the most pleasing feeling. And it would light, this is kind of people think this is, I don't know, blasphemous or something. But my husband has this thing he does where he'll walk up behind me if my hair's up, and he'll kiss the back of my neck. And it always makes all my hairs stand up and I get goosebumps. It was like that, like this intimate feeling of closeness. And it was just incredible. And we're going through the DNA, and we're going through the DNA, and we get to this spot, and he just halts, like all of a sudden, like hitting a brick wall without pain. And he says, "Do you see me?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, you're all around me. You're everywhere. You're through me. Yes, I see you." And he points and he says, "No, do you see me?" And there's this spot in our DNA that's called junk DNA. And I'd never heard of it before that. And he said, "That's me. I'm here. I am in you." And he said, "A person can deny that her father is her father, but ultimately we can look in the DNA and we can determine if that's true or not. I am your father. I am here. These are my fingerprints all over you from where I knit you together." And it was the most, to this day, the most profound information I've ever gotten, that this God not only thought me up, much like when we plan our own families, you wonder what your child will be like and what their future will be like and what good they'll do in the world. God thought you up in his mind, and you existed in his mind before you ever existed in a body. And he had all these hopes and dreams for you. And he saw this incredible potential in you that is so hard for us to see. And he knew this was good. And he said to himself, "Yes, I will knit this thing together. I will knit this person. I want Penny, and I'm going to make her. And she will do wonderful things." And here he is, knitting me together quietly in my mother's womb without her even knowing I'm there for a time. And there's just no more intimate of a God or a friend that you could have that thought you up. I mean, and adores you. He loved me far more than I could love him. I couldn't express how much love I had for him. His was so overwhelming. And this feeling of acceptance, that yes, I had done things that were not good, as has everyone. And I had done things that were good, but that wasn't why he loved me. He loved me because he thought me up and he made me. And this thing that he had made was good, and has the potential to be so much better. And I was falling short on my potential. And so I had to decide whether to stay or not. Initially, I was like, "I'm staying. I'm absolutely staying." And I knew there wouldn't be any penalty. God wouldn't think any less of me for staying. But something in my spirit convicted me that that was not the right choice. And I knew that I had not done what I needed to do here. I had not made an impact for this God who loved me so I had not loved. And not in the way that he needed me to. And so I decided to go back. And as soon as I decided to go back, we started pulling away from each other. And I started to cry. And I said, "Wait. And I said, "At least let me remember it. If you don't let me remember it, I won't have any hope." And I woke up and I was in the hospital bed, and there was a little old nurse sitting there next to me. I was off the ventilator, and she had her hand next to mine on the bed. And I said, "I was with God." And she said, "Oh, that's nice, dear." And I said, "No, I mean, just now I was with God." And she's like, "Oh, okay, let me go get your family." So she goes and gets them. And I immediately say to my sister, "I saw what you wrote on Facebook." And she went white. And I said, "You wrote, 'Hang on, kiddo, I'm coming.' I saw you write that message." And there's no way I could have known that. And there's, a bunch of other things. I always have to condense the story for time. So the nurse kind of runs everybody off because I'm super excited to tell everybody about God. And she wants me to kind of settle down and get some rest because, contrary to what people might think, a coma is not restful at all. And so she leaves the room and she pulls the curtains shut. And I close my eyes to try to sleep. And all of a sudden this bright light appears in the corner, and it's God, and it scares me. And so I scream. And he starts laughing, and I start laughing. And he's like, why did you scream? And I said, because you scared me. And he said, why did I scare you? And I said, because you're here in the room. He said, I'm always here. And I'm like, but you don't pop in like that. And so we laughed about it. And he's so funny, and he gets my sense of humor. And I, of course, because he made it. And so he had given me, of course, I always forget to pull this up. He had given me a message, and he said, I want you to share this with the world. And I'm like, I need to write this down. And he said, no, just listen. And so he shared the message with me. The next day I finally got pen and paper, and I wrote it down, and then I shared it with no one. And, because it was so beautiful, and I wanted this intimate letter to be just between me and God. And so my friend Brian, who runs a support group called Grief to Growth, for parents who've lost children of any age, he had been asking me to come up to Cincinnati and talk to their near-death experience group. And I had kept making up stories for why I couldn't do it. And so he checked in on me, and I said, yeah, I'm doing okay. And he said, well, I was wondering. And I said, I'll do it. And he was shocked. And I said, just stop now, because I'll think of an excuse not to do it. And so I went and did that talk. And so I kept having these episodes, and it, we were trying to get to a diagnosis and everything. And so before the last time we'd actually gotten to a diagnosis, and the doctors had said, generally what happens is people go kind of spontaneously into remission at 2.5 or 3 years, or they die. And that's it. We don't really have a treatment for you. And so I went into respiratory failure that last time, popped out of my body, was back with God. And I told him I was done. I said, kill me or keep me. I can't do this anymore. And he said, it's not me, it's you. I'm like, what do you mean it's me? You're God. You could just snap your fingers and I would be whole. And he said, you said you were going to go back and live. And I keep putting people in your path and opportunities in your path, and you keep saying no. And I said, well, I'm dying like every other month. When am I supposed to do all this stuff? And he said, you just have to say yes. And I said, you're telling me that if I go back and I say yes to these opportunities you're putting in my path, this is going to stop? And he said, yes. And I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, but you're God, so I'll give it a try. I mean, I could be that honest with God. And I came back, and every opportunity that's presented itself since then, I've done. I've never had another episode of respiratory failure. My IgE levels, your IgE level should be like under 300. At the time when I was so sick, mine was running between 7,000 and 10,000, so high that I didn't qualify for even trial kind of drugs that could help, that are still in clinical trials. And I had a surgery recently, and I'm like, let's check my IgE beforehand, just so we know what my risk is. And it was 30. And I've had perfect labs ever since then, and been whole and well. It's just crazy. I still have a hard time believing it. I don't know why. It's God. But it is so. I still have a lot of other health issues, but I told my husband the other day, I said, it is in me. I have the capability to be arrogant. I'm a Leo, and it just is what it is. And I said, I think that struggling with different health issues keeps me humble, and it gives me humility that I need. And so I will accept those things as a blessing.